That's not the time to interfere. I'll ask the honourable member as well from Edmonton Manning, please, to allow the responses to be given until the honourable member is recognized. The honourable member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, that minister may not understand how the energy industry works, but Canadians do. Regardless of the name, this cap is going to drive investment out of Canada, costing Canadians their jobs. It's been 9 long years of a Liberal government bent on destroying the Canadian energy sector, despite the industry being the biggest driver of the Canadian economy and employing hundreds of thousands of Canadian workers. So I'll ask the question again. Why is that extremist minister and that Prime Minister helping Donald Trump create American jobs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Foreign direct investment, Mr. Speaker, is up in Canada. Investors are coming to Canada because we provide stability. We provide opportunity. Mr. Speaker, Canada has a long-standing history of standing up and protecting Canadian workers. And when it comes to the last NAFTA negotiations, it was the Conservative Party of Canada that asked us to back down. Well, we didn't, Mr. Speaker. We stood up for steelworkers. We stood up for our auto workers. We stood up for our agricultural workers and our farmers, Mr. Speaker, and we'll do it again.
The honourable member from Cypress Hills, the honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost as they continue to crush the Canadian energy sector. This week, they announced their job-killing oil and gas production cap. Enbridge, a company based in Calgary, is taking their $700 million investment out of Canada to build a pipeline in America. That's jobs and powerful paychecks for American pipeliners, for American engineers, and for American truckers. Why is the Prime Minister so focused on creating powerful paychecks for Americans and not for Canadians?
That's what I want to know.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Consult experts that disagree with them, but recently their go-to guy, Sylvain Charlebois, said climate change is the agri-food sector's greatest challenge and agreed that climate change is a major driver of food price inflation. So if Conservatives actually cared about elevated food prices, they'd have a plan to address climate change, but they don't. They've got nothing. No plan to address the biggest challenge in the agri-food sector, no plan to address the biggest driver of food price inflation. Now, are they going to start attacking this expert too?
Yeah.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Liberals to get back to the real world where Canadians are struggling to eat, heat, and house themselves. While the minister tries to claim that the production cap is going to create thousands of jobs, his own department is saying that's going to cost the Canadian economy billions of dollars and that we're going to lose thousands of jobs. The Canadian oil and gas industry already provides powerful paychecks for our people. So why is the Prime Minister so hell-bent on destroying those powerful paychecks and giving them to Americans?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
We love powerful paychecks, Mr. Speaker. Actually, wages have outpaced inflation in Canada for the last 20 months, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite wants to talk about the United States. Well, I've got some information for him. Last week, the economist David Rosenberg said U.S.-based investors should strongly consider moving from New York to Toronto, Mr. Speaker. Now, Speaker, but I happen to agree with that economist, and I know that investors right around the world are looking to Canada.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. The government's own analysis admits that their cap on production will cost Canadians thousands of jobs and billions of dollars. Meanwhile, we have a Canadian company who can't get a pipeline approved in Canada, investing $700 million in a U.S. project. And get this, in 2023, they increased oil and gas imports to Canada with over 40 million barrels shipped across the Atlantic from Nigeria and Saudi Arabia alone. Why is this Prime Minister so intent on funding powerful paychecks in the U.S. and everywhere else while Canadians struggle to afford food and housing?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Innovation.
Speaker, I know Conservatives like to cherry pick per capita measures that try and talk down the Canadian economy. But in fact, if you look at per capita foreign direct investment, Canada is #1 in the world, ahead of Brazil, ahead of the United States. If you look at the IMF's projections of growth in Canada, our GDP is projected to grow more in the year 2025 than any other G7 country. We will not apologize on this side of the House for being optimistic about Canada's future.
The honourable member for Coast of Bay, Central Notre Dame.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, especially for Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore oil and gas industry, where for the second year in a row, there were no bids for new exploration licenses. Energy NL says it was not unexpected, pointing to a complex, inconsistent, and burdensome regulatory system, including the only emissions cap in the world. So, Mr. Speaker, will these economic assassins get rid of that stupid cap so that we can export Canadian oil and gas instead of jobs?
I'd like to encourage members to be judicious in their use of language. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
50%, Mr. Speaker, 50% higher. Now, what is that, Mr. Speaker? It's the imports of foreign oil into Canada when the Conservatives were in government than we are, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to standing up for our industries, whether it's the energy sector, whether it's steel workers, whether it's agricultural workers, Mr. Speaker, there is one party in this House that does that consistently. It is the Liberal Party of Canada. The Conservatives say, give it all away, and we will not do that. We will always stand up for Canadians, our workers, and our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. The Liberals claim they're prepared for a wave of immigration caused by Donald Trump's deportation threats. But to be ready, you'd have to be watching the borders. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, anyone who crosses the border secretly can make a refugee claim in Canada after 14 days. However, since the end of Roxham Road, the vast majority of RCMP officers have been redeployed. While there were 100 of them at the time to cover 160 kilometers around Roxham Road, Radio-Canada revealed that as of June 29th, there are now only 6 of them left. How many border agents are there today? The Honourable Minister of National Security. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP Commissioner and the Quebec Commander were both very clear. There has been no reduction in RCMP staffing in Quebec. In fact, we've invested more in the RCMP and CBSA. I have every confidence in their ability to deal with any contingency at any time. That's their job, to be ready and to foresee circumstances at the border. That's precisely what they're doing. We have to have confidence in their preparation and in their work. The honourable member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, Quebec is so concerned that they're considering policing the border themselves. This morning in committee, the Minister of Public Security told me he was surprised that François Legault would want to send officers to the border because it's purely and completely a federal responsibility. Well, that's the problem. It's federal jurisdiction, but the feds don't seem to have a plan for the border. Nature abhors a vacuum, so with the federal government nowhere to be seen at the borders, Quebec needs to react. What's the plan and how many more officers are being deployed? The Honourable Minister of National Security. Mr. Speaker, I greatly appreciate the question from my colleague. In fact, I enjoyed our exchange earlier in committee. We talked about this very question. I reassured the committee, and my colleague was there, that the RCMP and Border Services are ready for any contingency. There are plans in place. They've been there for months. I think we need to have confidence in them and understand that giving the details of operational plans for politicians to do that on the floor of the House of Commons would be very irresponsible. The honourable member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. As if there weren't already lots of reasons to doubt the federal government's readiness, listen to this. This morning in committee, the minister told me we shouldn't imagine hundreds of thousands of arrivals before that becomes a real threat. Mr. Speaker, he says he's ready to wait until it becomes a threat before doing anything. He even told us there was no hurry because Trump doesn't take office till January. Mr. Speaker, this isn't the National Improv League, it's government. It's their job to see crises coming. When are they going to do what needs doing? The Honourable Minister of Immigration and Citizenship. I thought the Bloc, and rightly so, was concerned about the CAQ policy of scaremongering. But here they are back at the charge. We have always been monitoring the borders, but I think everyone understands that it would be pretty amateurish of us to detail our plans here on the floor of the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, today Canada's Environment Commissioner proved the Liberals are fake environmentalists. That's right. In a damning report, it revealed the Liberals are not on track to meet their own emissions reductions targets, despite their plan to quadruple the carbon tax. According to the Commissioner, the Liberals are deceiving Canadians with, quote, unreliable emission reduction estimates. Wow. It's all pain, no gain. Why are the Liberals driving Canadians to food banks with their costly carbon tax with getting nothing in return?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner's report looks back at what's been happening since 1990. And you know what didn't happen under the Harper years, Mr. Speaker? Any type of action on climate change. No measures for energy efficiency. No measures for transit. No measures for electrification of transportation. No measures for renewable energy. This has changed since 2015, and we've bent the curves. We were going to miss our 2030 targets by at least 30%. We're 7% below 2005 levels. That's because of what we've been doing. It's about climate. It's about jobs, it's about the economy, and it's about the safety of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin Swan River Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, we can't believe a word the Liberals say on environment. Right. Even the Environment Commissioner revealed the Liberals misled Canadians on their emission claims. Right. He stated, quote, the recent decreases to projected 2030 emissions were not due to climate actions taken by government. Right. While the Environment Minister punishes Canadians with a carbon tax, Canada's worst record in the G7 for emissions reductions under the Liberals. Now that the truth has been exposed by the Commissioner, will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for the Environment.
What the Auditor General confirmed is that Canada's emissions are down below levels that we haven't seen since the mid-1990s. And we've proposed more measures to drive our emissions down, and the Conservatives want to work against us. What the Conservatives have confirmed today is they don't work for Canadians, they don't care about the environment, they don't listen to science, and they want our emissions to go up, Mr. Speaker. The failed former leader from Regina Capel has said repeatedly that our emissions are superior to other countries, and they should be driven up. We should be given that permission to produce more greenhouse gas emissions than other countries, Mr. Speaker. Not on this side of the House. We believe in science, and we're fighting climate change.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax is going up. Greenhouse gas emissions are also going up. The Liberals have put in place a tax plan, not an environmental plan. And since the carbon tax, Canada has fallen to near last place among OECD countries for emissions. Meanwhile, the Environment Minister is burning fossil fuels to attend COP. When will there be an election? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Look, Mr. Speaker, I think we've already answered that question. But what Canadians would like to know is about the potential show of leadership when it comes to national security. And the question for the Conservative leader is, how is it that somebody who one day wants to be in charge of the Coast Guard can't even get a security clearance. What does he have to hide? What do they have to hide? What do they not want us to know, Mr. Speaker? They should do their job and get the security clearance.
The honourable member from Vancouver East.
A breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. That's what the United Nations call the Conservative and Liberal Temporary Foreign Worker Program. It's an immigration program that uses closed work permits that trap people to one employer. It abuses, exploits, and underpays migrant workers to help big businesses. It drives down wages and hurts everyone. It's just another initiative of conservative liberals helping wealthy CEOs. Will the liberals stop this exploitation of migrant workers by ending the closed work permit system? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, the mistreatment and abuse of temporary foreign workers is unacceptable. Everyone deserves to work in safe, healthy, and dignified conditions. Under our watch, we have mandated employers provide all TFWs with information about their rights in Canada, prohibited reprisal by employers against workers who come forward with complaints, and prohibited employers from charging recruitment fees to workers. And in Budget 2024, Mr. Speaker, we are investing $41 million to ensure that TFWs know their rights by funding community organizations. We know there is more work to do.
I ask once again all members, especially the member who just asked the question from Vancouver East, to please not take the floor unless recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Churchill-Kuwatanuck-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, Barons River First Nation still does not have clean drinking water. The water treatment plant is over a year behind schedule, and the community has been forced to haul water over 300 kilometers by truck every time, costing thousands of dollars. The lack of clean water has impacted dialysis patients, the health of children, elders, the whole community. And yet the Liberals aren't keeping on top of the contractor who hasn't gotten the job done. They're not funding the equipment the First Nation has asked for. Once again, the Liberals are failing First Nations on clean water. What are they going to do to deliver clean water to Barons River now?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
I want to thank the members of the INAN Committee who passed a government amendment declaring a human right to clean drinking water on First Nation. Historic for this country, Mr. Speaker. And I really hope the member opposite will help ensure that we have smooth passage of this bill through this House and into Senate so we can get this law in place and protect water for generations to come. And I also want to congratulate two of the First Nations in her own riding who just recently received funding for K-12 schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Egmont.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most difficult tasks faced by our government was to repair Veterans Affairs Canada after all the damage done by the former Conservative government. I know that it was tough to fix, but I also know that many hard-working public servants at Veterans Affairs headquarters on Prince Edward Island are proud to make a positive impact once again. As that most solemn of days approaches, November the 11th, will the Minister of Agriculture share with this House how our government has been helping to make a difference in the lives of veterans and their families?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague from Egmont for his question. And as you're aware, Mr. Speaker, the former Conservative government of Canada slashed funding from the Department of Veterans Affairs, slashed hurt veterans, and closed 9 Veterans Affairs offices right across the country that serve veterans right across this country. Since we formed the government, Mr. Speaker, we have invested over $11 billion in veteran support and have opened the 9 offices across this country. Veterans can be assured that our government, the Liberal government, will continue to support veterans right across the country.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Revelations in court filings show that there's another lawsuit against the Liberal minister from Edmonton showing that he broke the law. This one shows that his shady company and his business partner, well, he's now been directly named in this lawsuit in their search for buyers. Quote, they're going to sell this. I just updated Felix and Randy. And quote, are you confident? Really? I won't tell Shauna, Felix, and Randy yet. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, they're not worth the cost or the corruption. So will the Liberal minister from Edmonton stand up and admit to Canadians that he broke the law?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this issue has been dealt with by the Ethics Commissioner, who has cleared that member on 3 occasions. When it comes to his former business partner, we agree with this House. He should have been clear and answered those questions, and now he will face those consequences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Canadians can't believe a word from these Liberals when it comes to this scandal. We know that the Cabinet Minister was sitting around the table while his company was applying for federal government contracts, and we know that his business lied before a parliamentary committee. But there's more explosive reporting today about the Liberal Minister from Edmonton and his company fraudulently applying for government contracts. Now, experts are saying that if this is proven to be true, that the Prime Minister should expel the Minister from Cabinet. Conservatives are saying we should call the cops. So will the Prime Minister fire him today or wait till he's dragged out in handcuffs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is making reference to an article that came out today, and I can assure everyone in this House and those watching that the article confirms that the company in question has never received any contracts as an Indigenous business and has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. And our focus is on building up Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs through procurement. We're not going to let any members across the way try to block the progress to achieving economic reconciliation, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with Indigenous partners to reduce the barriers and increase participation in federal procurement.
Order. The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, Indigenous people are outraged that government contracts meant for Indigenous businesses are being scooped up by shady companies with no Indigenous connection. Today we learned that the Minister of Employment's fraud-ridden company, Global Health Imports, claimed to be Indigenous in order to try and secure millions in lucrative government contracts. Now this all happened while the Minister of Employment was actively running the company. It's time to end the charade. When will the Minister admit that he is the real Randy and acknowledge that it's wrong to falsely claim Indigenous heritage and take contracts meant for Indigenous peoples and resign?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Procurement Services.
Speaker, we're taking every effort to ensure that Indigenous people are properly associated with the contracts that are procured. That's why we've established the very motion that's going forward. Members opposite want to criticize and be critical of the program, but it's essential to ensure that Indigenous people have the right, have the ability for economic success and integration so that they too can succeed, and that we get and we understand that those on the Indigenous list are managed appropriately, and the procurement process is also taking transparent measures forward.
The Honourable Member from Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, today it was revealed that a company co-owned by the Employment Minister bid on federal contracts while claiming to be Indigenous owned. The company, Global Health Imports, has 2 shareholders. Perhaps 3 if you count the other Randy. But according to the Assembly of First Nations, the Liberals' Indigenous procurement program is being abused by shell companies, with the vast majority of those federal contracts going to non-Indigenous businesses. Will the Prime Minister listen to those leaders, call an investigation, and remove the Minister from Cabinet until the inquiry is finished?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
The article makes it very clear the association that was being referenced here did not get a contract. They were not listed on the Indigenous list, and we've taken the steps appropriately in the procurement to ensure that that doesn't happen, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The honourable member for Jonquière. There's what the government does, and then there says, and then there's the facts. And unfortunately, these two things don't often correspond. The Environment Commissioner's reports are very hard to read. I would invite the honourable member for Jonquière to start again from the top, please. There's what the government says, and then there's the facts. And unfortunately, these two things don't often correspond. The Environment Commissioner's reports make tough reading. And despite what the minister claims, the Liberals' record is really not good. This government takes the survival of threatened species lightly. And when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, well, Canada is the worst in the G7 when it comes to meeting its targets. The Liberals have quit. Are they really ready to leave biodiversity and the fight against climate change to the Conservatives? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague knows how much respect I have for him, but you know, a good part of his party is allied with the Conservative Party to bring down the government to prevent a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector. They want to prevent us from putting in place a law to protect nature. And when we came to power in 2015, Mr. Speaker, Canada didn't protect even 1% of our oceans and our coasts. We're up to 16% today. We'll be at 30% in 2030, as we promised in Montreal at COP15.
For the second time today, I'm going to ask the honourable member from Miramichi Grand Lake to please not take the floor unless recognized by the chair.
The honourable member for Jonquière. Canada has just 6 years to meet its greenhouse gas emissions target of 45% under 2005 levels. 6 years. According to the Environment Commissioner, Canada has only reduced emissions by 7.1% as of 2022. That's a terrible record. By the time the federal government wakes up, all the forests will have burned and all the glaciers will have melted. 7.1%, that's not even a sixth of the goal. And, I mean, come on, Mr. Speaker, do they really want to leave the future of the planet in the hands of the Conservatives and their friends in the oil and gas sector? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my colleague that when we came to power in 2015, the projections were that Canada was going to miss its 2030 target by at least 30%. We have flattened the curve, and as of 2022, we were at 7.1% under 2005 levels. That's the difference between the two. It's like the equivalent of adding 79 million cars to Canada's roads with, pollution. We didn't do that because of our plan, and I look forward to working with my colleagues so that Canada can do more to fight climate change.
The honourable member for Banff-Airdrie.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost of housing, and veterans who fought for our country are feeling the pinch more than anyone. Sadly, veterans are 3 times more likely to become homeless. And a recent study indicates that there's 4 times more homeless veterans than the government claims. As many as 10,000 homeless veterans, in fact. Terrible. That's 10,000 too many. Yeah. So how can the government who caused the problem and who won't even admit the extent of the problem be trusted to fix the problem?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of sending our citizens to war includes the cost of taking care of them when they come home. That's why we have moved forward with programs that are designed to actually ensure that communities have the capacity to provide housing to those who have put their lives at risk in order to protect our country overseas and at home. Mr. Speaker, I recently was able to work with the Canadian Alliance to end homelessness, to scale up a program that has ended functional homelessness for veterans in 3 communities across this country so they can expand it to 26 additional cities. We've also worked very closely with community organizations across this country, and what's disappointing, Mr. Speaker, when it came time to put your position on the record, the Conservatives voted against these programs.
The honourable member for for Banff Airdrie.
Well, the number of homeless veterans just keeps going up, so obviously the photo ops and press releases aren't getting the job done, Mr. Speaker. The Veterans Association Food Bank in Calgary reports that in the last 6 months alone, their numbers have tripled in what they're spending to keep veterans housed, clothed, and fed. Veterans served our country, and they deserve better than the homelessness and hunger that they're getting from this NDP Liberal government. Veterans, like all Canadians, can't afford the cost. So when will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so veterans can finally get the respect they deserve?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans
We're
Affairs.
not going to take any lessons from the Conservatives. They shut down 9 Veterans Affairs offices. We opened 9, plus another one in my hometown of Surrey Centre. They laid off 1,000 Veterans Affairs officers who are there to help veterans get the services they need. We reinstated those services. We've created services to help those veterans get the needs that they need, and we will continue to do so going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, the cost of rent and housing has gone up. It's doubled, and homelessness is up. The Bloc has supported the Liberals for 2 non-confidence votes. The Conservatives are calling for cutting the GST on new homes, and we've heard from many who feel that the Conservative leader's plan is a step in the right direction. Will the Liberal Bloc cut the GST on housing, or is it going to continue to fund its programs that build 0 new homes? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, as the member knows very well, we are making investments to build affordable housing. Just as an example, in the Housing Accelerator Fund, we have an agreement underway with Quebec to build 8,000 social housing units. The Conservatives are against that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they talk about when we cut GST for apartment rent, the Conservatives for building apartments, the Conservatives were against that. The Conservatives' leaders' strategy is just to cut, and that's unacceptable.
The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, cities like Toronto are on the front lines when it comes to responding to the housing crisis. That's why last year we announced a $500 million federal investment in Toronto through the Housing Accelerator Fund to unlock over 53,000 new homes over the next decade. Last week, the Conservative leader announced a plan that will impact home building in Toronto by making dangerous cuts to housing investments. People in my constituency of Davenport can't afford these kinds of enormous Conservative housing cuts. To the Minister of Housing, how can we stop these Conservative cuts and solve the housing crisis for Canadians?
Really good question.
Thank you very much.
Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I want to offer a couple of points. First, I want to thank my colleague for her advocacy for her community to receive funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is delivering hundreds of millions of dollars for housing in Toronto. Fascinating, Mr. Speaker, is the Conservative strategy, which is now to forbid their MPs from advocating for their communities. Wow. On this side of the House, we have community advocates who will stand up so their communities get the funding they need. Second, we know that actually building homes takes investments. That's why we're putting money into the system to help build affordable housing, to help reduce barriers to construction. But third, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative strategy is to cut billions of dollars from housing. That simply isn't going to work.
Can I ask the Honourable Member from Kingston and the Islands to please, if he wishes to have a conversation, to have it offline. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
The Honourable Member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's failed gun policies are putting Toronto at risk. This year, there have been 126 more shootings in Toronto compared to last year, and Peel Regional Police report seizing 1 illegal firearm every 36 hours. The Liberal MPs who were elected from the Toronto area should be here making noise about these problems, but they're silent. And why are they silent, Mr. Speaker? Because they've decided to back up the Prime Minister's failed policies. When will they stop choosing the Prime Minister over the people?
The The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, our position as a Liberal Party, my position as a Toronto MP is simple. Let's keep the citizens of our cities safe. How do we do that? By ensuring that we have less gun violence on our streets. How do we do that? By shoring up our borders to prevent guns from crossing the border. The specific border services that party cut when they were in power prior to 2015. What we also do is we recognize the important impact on domestic violence that gunfare has. When we keep guns out of the homes in people in cities in Canada, what we're doing is ensuring that domestic violence doesn't have a pernicious impact on women. That's how you keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member from Durham.
I want my friends and neighbours in Toronto to take note. This Liberal Justice Minister is looking back at things that happened over 10 years ago while he's been here for 9 years and takes zero responsibility for crime getting worse. Imagine that, getting elected to serve your constituents, sitting here for 9 years and can't take a single bit of responsibility for a problem that he should be trying to fix. Mr. Speaker, it's very, very clear. Crime is worse. The Liberal MPs elected to serve Toronto are failing to do their job. When will they stop choosing the Prime Minister over the people?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our government works very effectively with law enforcement professionals across the country, including the regional police, the Peel Regional Police that my colleague referred to, the City of Toronto, the York Regional Police. We've invested, Mr. Speaker, money that the Conservatives cut in the RCMP and border services to prevent illegal guns from entering the country. And Mr. Speaker, we're very surprised the Conservative Party would turn back gun control legislation designed to protect Canadians by making it legal again to have assault-style firearms on the streets of the country.
The Honourable Member from Niagara Falls.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, corruption or crime. Since 2015, when they formed government, violent crime has skyrocketed by 50%. And sadly, during their reign of error, they have also allowed an evil monster, Paul Bernardo, to be transferred to a medium security institution. On November 26th, this child rapist and serial killer is scheduled to have a parole hearing. Will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister finally get tough on crime and assure Canadians that Paul Bernardo will remain behind bars where he belongs for the rest of his life?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for all members in this House not to use the name of some of the most notorious killers in the country to give them the exact publicity that they crave. This particular individual is locked up in a federal prison behind two very high fences with a lot of razor wire. Mr. Speaker, I saw myself the secure federal correctional facility that this particular individual is in. My colleague also knows the parole board is independent and it would be absolutely inappropriate to prejudge their work, but I have confidence that they'll do their work properly for public safety.
The Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Speaker, this summer, millions of Canadians tuned into CBC to cheer on Team Canada at the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris. Canadian athletes pushed limits, set new records, and showed us the unifying power of sport. Many of these trained at Canadian Sport Institute Atlantic in Halifax West. Canada's athletes give it their all to represent our country, so we're going to keep supporting them with more pay for more athletes as they train to represent Canada. Can the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity tell us how we're going to support these athletes so they can keep representing Canada with pride and excellence?
The Honourable Minister for Sport and Physical Activity.
Mr. Speaker, the Paris 2024 Games were extraordinary. Canadians cheered on our Olympic and Paralympic teams as records were broken, medals were won, and history was made. The journey from playground to podium is long and it's hard, and our athletes train for years. Our Liberal government is proud to support over 1,900 athletes through the Athlete Assistance Program, and we're also proud to be increasing this program to provide more money for more athletes. An additional $7 million a year means a 23% in the living allowance and an additional 30% allowance for Paralympic athletes. By investing in Canadian athletes, we're inspiring the next generation and building a stronger, united Canada.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, homelessness is growing amongst seniors for the first time ever. Canadian seniors who live on fixed incomes are being hit hardest by skyrocketing rents driven by unregulated corporate greed. The Liberals have sat by while private investors jack up their rents and squeeze our parents, grandparents, and veterans out of their homes. When will the Liberals stop caving to corporate landlords and private long-term care investors to protect seniors?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for her question, and I share her concern about the plight of some of Canada's most vulnerable, those without a roof over their head. In order to address those challenges, we need to ensure that we build out the affordable housing stock so people can find a place that is safe, that they can afford. That's why we're moving forward with billions of dollars of investments to help build affordable housing in this country at a pace that is not seen in many decades. It's why we put money on the table to support nonprofits to buy up existing affordable housing that exists in the market to ensure that it remains affordable forever, and it's why we have restored, after decades of cuts, more investments in cooperative and affordable housing. We'll continue to do what it takes to ensure every Canadian.
The honourable member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will soon pause to remember the brave men and women of Canada's armed forces who served our country and made the ultimate sacrifice. Whether in Flanders, on Juno Beach, the hills of Korea, or the sands of Afghanistan, they fought for Canada, for our democracy, and the freedoms that we all enjoy today. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to wear this country's uniform. I believe in our democratic institutions. I believe all members of this House are duty-bound to accept and hold high the torch passed from those fallen in the defence of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully ask the government if they all can say the same.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker.